So again, welcome to our Turing-Roche Knowledge Share Series event. The aim of these monthly events are to bring together members of the Turing and the Roche networks, as well as the wider scientific community, to hear partnership updates, different perspectives on data science topics, and also build new connections. Just to kick us off, I'm just going to share a few slides about the partnership. Hopefully you can all see those. So the clue is in the name with the Turing-Roche partnership. It's a partnership between the Alan Turing Institute and Roche. Hopefully most of you have heard of at least one of these organizations. But if not, the Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI. We were established in 2015, and the Turing-Roche partnership sits under the Health and Medical Sciences programme, which is one of our flagship programmes at the Institute. Roche was established in 1896 as a leading healthcare company, and they have a long-term interest in personalised healthcare and also a growing number of academic partnerships as well. And we formally launched our strategic 5-year partnership together in June 2021. And this is our kind of partnership North Star, so our kind of guiding aim for the 5 years. So ultimately, we're collaborating to explore this term patient and disease heterogeneity through advanced analytics. So put more simply, why patients respond differently to treatment and why diseases manifest in different ways in different people. Obviously, this is quite broad, so we're tackling this through a stepwise iterative manner, which you can see illustrated on the right, with a main focus of developing methodology and focusing on different research themes, such as structure missingness, predictive modeling, and multimodal data integration. You can find out more about those research themes and our research in general on our Turing webpage, which you can see a link to at the bottom of that slide. And our core partnership team is pictured here with representatives from Turing and Roche. And then this is expanded out with researchers we have funded through open calls, Turing enrichment students we've taken on, and also more recently, our cohort of community scholars. Again, you can find out more about who is involved in our partnership network on our partnership webpage. Also, a key part of the partnership is wider connections and collaborations we want to build. So it's really critical for us to be running events like these to get you all involved. And I know some of you might have attended our events previously, and our usual format is having a Turing speaker and a Roche speaker speaking on a different data science topic each. We will be continuing this format for some of our events, but we're also really excited that as the partnership research is progressing, we'll be shining a light on that at some of these monthly events as well. So in that vein, I'm delighted to welcome today our speaker, Rohan Chakraborty, who is a senior research associate for the Turing-Roche partnership. Rohan will be discussing transparent AI and the different ways this can be considered, particularly in relation to the trustworthiness of AI models in healthcare and clinical applications. As mentioned, we'll be hearing from Rohan for about 30 minutes, and then we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. Feel free to pop them in the Q&A box as we go, and then we'll get to them at the end. So with that, Rohan, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Today's topic would be transparent AI in healthcare. First, looking at what can be different strategies of approach, and then looking at the current challenges in this landscape of large health data. What can be the pitfalls and how to sort of avoid them. So just setting the scene, if you look at the literature, there are many new AI models being published every day in health applications, but very few of them actually make it to the clinic. There are some reasons for that which are understandable, which is this is a high stakes area, patient lives are at stake. So it would be understandable to be careful in deployment from a safety aspect. But even having that in mind, the translation of AI models into the clinic is very rare. And one important reason for that is For clinical AI tools to be widely adopted, they need to be transparent, for them to be trustworthy, and for clinicians and health practitioners to be confident in using them, as well as for regulators and health policymakers to sort of green light these tools for use. With that, we will go to the first part. So there are 4 parts in this presentation. The first 2 parts relate to explainable models, and the last 2 parts relate to interpretable results. We start off with causal machine learning, which sort of ties into what I said earlier, that usually explainable models are more difficult to achieve rigorously. And from that perspective, one of the most challenging but also exciting areas of machine learning is causal machine learning. One of the sort of holy grails of explainable AI. It's still quite a nascent area, just developing, and there is lots to do. Even the mathematical foundations, there's lots to do before they are sort of mainstream. So I will give a broad overview of the different areas related to transparent AI. I will give some technical perspectives, but I won't go into details of equations deliberately, just to cover the landscape as a whole. The best way to approach this would be to think of when not to use causal inference and when to use causal inference. So causal inference is sort of like a proxy to actual causal experiments. And if you can do actual causal experiments, that's always better, in which case don't do causal inference. But what do we mean by actual causal experiments? In the case of AI, say large tech companies, this would be A/B tests, where you have a control group and to whom is presented the existing product. And then there is another group where a new version of the product, maybe with a new feature, is presented. And then the difference in user engagement and user feedback is seen, is observed. In case of healthcare, it's obvious that the equivalent would be randomized double-blind clinical control trials, as is used for when developing a new treatment, like a vaccine or a drug. So that would be the treatment group, whereas the control group would have some alternative treatment or a placebo. So this would be the best option, in which case we should not use causal inference. So when do we use causal inference then? We use causal inference when, due to some reason, the first option of actually doing the experiment is not viable, and the data is rich enough for us to actually conduct the causal inference or actually measure the causal inference results and deploy the equations of causal inference. For that, the data needs to be rich enough in the sense that it has to tick certain boxes. But also equally important is the assumption that the model that we come up with, the causal diagram, so to say, is valid. It is assumed that that is valid, and then based on that, you use the causal equations and derive inference. So these 2 points, and there is lots of literature on how to ensure that the model is most probably valid and what kind of data is best for causal inference. That's a topic in itself. However, the thing to note here is, as we are slowly going towards large multimodal health data sets, and they're fast emerging and growing every year or every month even. So examples are UK Biobank, Genomics England, the MIMIC or EICU data, the TCGA or TCIA cancer data sets, etc. So the intuition here would be the evaluation of your causal inference model and results. For that, you want to have as many variations of attributes and outcomes of patients as possible in your data. So in a sense, causal inference works nicely for large data sets. The reason being, which brings us to the next slide, and this is the only sort of slide with some equations. So difference between association, which is what almost all machine learning models do, is association or correlation between the input and the output variable. But when we try to move towards intervention or counterfactuals, which is what causal inference does, what we mean by intervention or counterfactual is almost sort of imagining what would have happened, what would have been the result if one of the attributes one of the input attributes is changed, and what would be the flow up to the result. And of course, you will have your model and you will be testing your model, but if the data set is rich enough, you can actually test if the model is working correctly, because you would have a wide range of difference in attributes among the patients. These can be ethnicity, age, gender, etc. Hope that sort of makes sense. I will touch upon the two main ways of doing causal inference. These are structural causal models, or SCM, first developed by Jody Parle. And so they use something called directed acyclic graphs. So directed acyclic graphs, it's a graph, it's directed, so there are arrows from the input to the output, and acyclic, that is, they don't turn on themselves into a cycle. So it's from one end to the other. And he came up with a sort of methodology or set of equations for doing causal inference using structural causal models called the do operator or do calculus. There is another way of doing this through the way of potential outcomes. It's called the Rubin causal model. So where you have sort of a range of levels of the input in an interventional experiment and the range of potential outcomes. And you use that to develop a causal sort of framework. There is another way of doing this, which is becoming very popular, especially in the area of genomics and genetics, called Mendelian randomization. But again, repeating that if possible, the randomized control trial is the gold standard. I will mention one work that my group did. In fact, I was the first author of that one, which uses structural causal models, just as an example, before going up onto part 2 of this presentation. So just as an example, so counterfactual causal inference is how you mainly do causal inference. So counterfactual means there is the fact, that is what actually happened, and then there is the counterfactual. What if something was changed, and what would be the effect, right? So so there was a paper on counterfactual fairness in machine learning, so which asked the questions, what if? But it is, in a way, a probabilistic framework for the entire population. For healthcare, we would like to ask individualized questions for individualized healthcare or personalized healthcare. personalized predictions in healthcare. So we started from counterfactual fairness, but we developed the maths to ask contrastive questions. So instead of what if, we asked the question, why this and not that? Why was this treatment for this particular individual, whereas the other individual with the same illness was given another treatment? So these kinds of questions started in the area of uh, legal matters, where, almost as if to defend the decisions taken. But obviously that makes a lot of sense in the healthcare sector as well. So this was a previous work which was published. Right now we are working on an expansion on that, which is proximal versus distal causality. Distal causality is sort of the entire causal model of the whole data set. So you go back to the primary causes and connect it to whatever outcome you are looking at. What we are looking at, again, a mathematical paper, which is proximal causality, which means that what is the smallest model nearest to the outcome that you need to consider and still have valid causal inference, instead of looking way back into the total data set, which can be huge. So this is the end of part one. Part two, which is also belongs to the explainable AI part, explainable models, which is hybrid deep learning, which is the area I primarily work in. So hybrid deep learning, what this means is we have a data-driven sort of black box deep network off the shelf, which we know works well, but it is sort of black box. We use that to get some coarse results from our data quickly because it's pre-trained. We might do a little bit of fine-tuning on our particular data that we are working on. But then after that, we would have a sort of mechanistic model, well understood, transparent model after that, which is modeled based on the application at hand. It takes the coarse output from the deep network and fine-tunes it and gives the final fine-grained personalized prediction. So it's a combination of deep learning and mechanistic learning. But there are different ways of doing that. You can have them one after the other and leave it at that. However, if you can make the equations of your mechanistic model differentiable and sort of line them up one after the other, then you could, in principle, take the error in prediction right at the end and flow back that error both through the mechanistic model and the deep network and train these two at the same time, which is called end-to-end integration. Other ways of doing this, on the right, you can see physics or biology inspired deep learning, which can be another way of saying hybrid deep learning, actually. It can be a Bayesian neural network where the domain-based information is given as prior, so the other way around. So the domain information comes first, and then the deep network. What I explained in the at first, hybrid deep learning or physics-inspired deep learning is the deep network is first and then the mechanistic learning. Or it can be mixed. For example, something called declarative neural networks. Declarative neural networks means that the mechanistic layers are integrated within the sort of deep network layers. So in case of images, it might be convolutional layers in deep networks. And the mechanistic layers or transparent layers are integrated within that, right? So the easiest way of thinking about this is deep network first and then mechanistic model. The sorry, someone's mechanistic model first, then the deep network, or the both integrated together. Neurosymbolic AI is more rigorous. So it is integration of neurosymbolic logic with AI, but that's an area I don't usually work in, but I just wanted to mention it here. Turing has a really strong group on neurosymbolic AI if anyone is interested. Right. Quickly going over two examples of hybrid deep learning, which was published through my group. So first one is digital pathology images, cell segmentation in digital pathology images. You can use a common deep network, say, in this case, it was segmentation network or SegNet. No, for this one, actually, we used UNet. Sorry, the second example was SegNet. So in this one, we had a simple UNet for cell segmentation to give a quick output, almost no retraining on the UNet at all. However, and very little annotations. In fact, annotations only for the simple cases where the cells are properly separated. However, this is not that good at separating conjoined cells or overlapping cells. Of course, if you did a lot of annotations and even gave examples of annotating the conjoined ones, then you can train a deep network anyways. But a clinician's time is short. It's very expensive. So this is an example of a weakly supervised training where we only give the easy examples of cell segmentation, and the UNet does the first course output with minimal retraining. And then we use a mechanistic model. Mechanistic model can be anything. In this case, it's a water flow model. In a very high level overview, one can say that the water pressure equations, the pressure is highest at constrictions. And hence, you cut through the conjoined objects. Segmentation of conjoined objects is a sort of classic problem in computer vision. You cut through the conjoined objects at each point of highest pressure, maximum pressure. But again, the deep network can be anything. The mechanistic model can be. This is just an example. Another example. This is radiology. So nodule segmentation from lung CT scans. Here we used a SegNet, and then we have something called a level set. Again, we won't go into the details. You can use level sets, you can use graph cuts, etc. But the theory, the sort of concept is simple, similar as before, which is the deep network gives the first level of course output, and then you have a well understood transparent model that gives the final fine-grained output. Next, we go on to part 3 of the presentation. Now, part 3 and part 4 are more towards interpretable results. And the first part of that is aligning clinical and learned features. So learned features are features learned by the AI model or deep learning model or machine learning model. And aligning that with clinically relevant features to boost the trustworthiness of the output. So this goes, let's go straight to an example. So this is the first example, again, based on the work done by me with collaborators. This actually was done by my first PhD student in Oxford. So self-attention based networks, they are quite popular now and almost becoming standardized. So multi-instance self-attention based networks, won't go into the details, but what it mainly means is It not only looks at the overall features of the image, but it is also trained to give attention to multiple instances of the object that we are interested in. So this is just an example of sort of classification of fungal disease, and the disease sort of the output types are based on the structure of the head of the fungus, and but there might be multiple instances of it, whereas the remaining parts of the image are not that important. So how to make sure that the deep network is looking at the right places? Some more examples from that work. The top row is on breast cancer, where we would want to focus attention on sort of the ages of proliferation. And for skin cancer, which is the lower row, the clinically established features are ABCD features, that is asymmetry, border irregularity, color, and diameter. So we try to show that it is indeed focusing on the boundaries of the lesions. As you can see, most of the ABCD parameters are related to that. Another way of doing this is graphical neural networks. Again, work through my second PhD student. Graphical neural networks are quite a broad area of study in AI. But we came up with a hierarchical graph neural network, like in 3 stages, which looks at digital pathology images. At the most zoomed in stage, highest resolution, the nodes are placed first on relevant cell areas. You can think of it as those are the smallest graphs. Then in the second stage, these are sort of collected and clustered at a meso stage, second stage, where it looks at tumor microenvironments, and we then see whether it is located at biologically meaningful areas. And the final overall graph would be at the whole slide scale, and then we would get an overall picture of the whole slide. So sort of 3-stage hierarchical graph neural network. But at each stage, you from the structure of the network, you can interpret whether it is aligned with biologically meaningful regions of the image. So we go on to part 4, which is the last part of interpretable results. And we look at quantifying uncertainty of predictions, particularly from the point of view of personalized healthcare, keeping in mind patient heterogeneity. So this is an example from a recent Turing-Roche paper, which is led by my colleague, Dr. Chris Banerjee, and it was published in Nature Medicine in 2023. So 2 patients come in, if you look at the picture, 2 patients come in with a headache. And you can have an AI diagnostic tool which can, which maybe gives migraine as the highest probability for both. However, taking into account other characteristics, you might want to also look at other causes. So, and one option can be treat with painkillers, but another option can be run for the diagnostic tests. But what would be the sort of, it's not exactly confidence intervals. Conformal analysis is more subtle and interesting than that. But you can think of at the moment as confidence intervals, and determine when to go for further tests or only take the top class. And similarly, perhaps an easier way of explaining this and how this is slightly different from just having conformal intervals, or say for classification purposes, taking the top 3 classes as output. How is this different from that? So slightly easier to explain in a classification setting, how this is slightly different. If you want to go into further details of this, please feel free to reach out to me later. So suppose there are 9 subtypes of a particular cancer, and those are our output classes of our AI model. Now, one can give the highest probability class. One could also give the top 3 or top 5. What conformal analysis does is, one way of sort of defining it loosely is, what is the minimum size of the set, output set, that would definitely contain the true class above a certain level of confidence, say 95% level of confidence. Above 95% level of confidence, how many outputs needs to be in the conformal set for that particular sample to be sure that the right label is contained in it above that level of confidence. Hope that sort of makes sense. It's certainly different from just giving the top 3 or top 5 values. Again, this is a really interesting area of study. In this particular project, which is ongoing, we are looking at prostate cancer data, and from 2 hospitals. One of them were annotated by senior expert pathologists, and the other one by trainee pathologists. And we are looking at sort of differences in conformal confidence between the 2. Last example from this is in image generation. So generative models are very sort of popular these days. And so generative image models are to be used really carefully in specifically medical imaging applications, really carefully. Because when you generate a new image, of course, that's a synthetic image, so it's not for a particular patient. And if there are artifacts in the new image, that might create more problems than benefits in these kind of applications. This is not just generating a new sort of AI generated art piece. So the other problem is, and this is quite interesting, and this project was on that, and the first author, who is a PhD student, won the best student paper award this year. Sorry, this should be 2023 December, actually, a couple of months ago. But this project, what it looks like at is these generative models, AI-based generative models, have stochastic elements in them. So that if you run it with the same prompt or input several times, it will generate slightly different outputs, which makes a lot of sense when generating AI art or generating poetry on ChatGPT. You would want it to be slightly different. You don't want it to give the same every time. But here in medical imaging applications, it's different. So what does it even mean if you have different AI generated images for the same prompt? So the application areas are interesting, that you can perhaps generate higher resolution imaging modalities from lower resolution ones, etc. But one has to be really careful. And uncertainty quantification of this kind of applications is really important. So we have sort of completed the main part of the slides, but I will just open up some discussions on the main challenges facing this area of work. Especially as we move into these large, like big multimodal data sets, as I mentioned before. So, and they present their unique sort of challenges. So first is multimodal AI. So as we move towards these large data sets, we would have multiple modalities of AI, which means we will have electronic health records, clinical data, we will have genomics, transcriptomics data, and we will have imaging data, radiology, pathology, etc. We might even have spatial transcriptomics data in the near future, or starting to have them. So how best to combine these? So these images, so all the rest of the images were taken from my own work, but this one is from a paper in cancer cell from the Mahmood lab, Faisal Mahmood's lab in Harvard. So how to best combine the multimodal data while preserving transparency and explainability, interpretability of results, etc. So preserving all that we have discussed, but dealing with multimodal data, how and when to fuse them together. So there, as you can see, there are different ways of doing that. That is at which stage? Fuse it at data stage right at the beginning, or fuse it at a late stage near the results, or somewhere in the middle, intermediate fusion. This is a paper from the partnership. In fact, this was, I think, the first partnership paper, Turing-Roche partnership paper. And it was published in Nature Machine Intelligence. So learning from data with structured missingness. So how is it different from random missingness or missingness that we have known so far? So there are different ways of dealing with missing data, especially data missing at random. Like many people know the mice package, which is quite popular. However, as we are going again to these large health data sets, there might be structures in the missing data, which is almost like a new source of information. So if you see specific chunks of missing data and try to understand the patterns in them, that might shed light on certain questions of fairness. Like certain patients might not have had a certain type of test data from a part of UK. So structured missingness or structures in the missingness can lead to further interpretations and inferences, especially in these large data sets. The third one is continual learning. So this connects to the fact that these large data sets are ever growing, and how to develop models that are not static, but continues to learn. There are some examples here which I will skip due to time shortage. And the final one is, this is the final slide, which is transparent AI for public good, but through laws and regulations and ethical considerations connected to social science, philosophy, etc. And the work on that is slightly separated from Turing-Roche. That's done through a sort of international body called the Global Partnership on AI. But that is more like a law and regulations and policy perspective. And in fact, the last paper, which was published with Yoshua Bengio, who is a Turing awardee, was in some of the recommendations were incorporated in the latest EU AI Act. but that's another way of doing it. So this brings us to the last poll, and that's the end of the presentation. Over to Vicky again.
So the first question is, have you thought about hybrid mechanisms with large language models?
That's a great question. Yes. Yes, but keeping in mind that my specialization is with images. However, keeping that as the main modality, we are thinking of integrating with large language models, especially in the area of sort of integrated, almost like an integrated assistant, especially in digital pathology, particularly for trainee pathologists. So it's almost like you can think of it almost like a training module, where it learns on large amount of medical literature and textbooks, as well as has the images, and it gives integrated output. I mentioned the Faisal Mahmood's lab before. I would encourage Farhana, if you go to Faisal's group page, they have a sort of, they are also working in this area, and they have a sort of demo on this particular topic. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, we've had more of a comment than a question, but do you follow the work of the Alliance for Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare? I don't know if you've come across it, Rohan.
I have. But there are a lot of alliances like this coming up recently. This is one of them. Yeah, but quite similar work to my last slide, like the GPA work. It's all very interesting. Yeah, but my understanding is, I mean, there are many of them coming up, but I have had a look at them. Yeah.
Great. So the next question is, how does the combination of a deep neural network with a mechanistic model make it explainable? Isn't the DNN part of the model still something of a black box, and hence the inputs to the mechanistic models may be difficult to interpret / explain?
Yeah, that's a great point. So the trick there is to how to best explain this. So the trick there is to give a part of the problem to the deep network where we are not that concerned with the explainability, and keep the rest of it. But that part would be highly data driven. But keep the rest of it, especially the second part of it, where the actual decision is being taken for the mechanistic model. A technical way of saying this would be use the deep learning as mainly a feature extractor. So yes, it is still not explainable, that deep learning part, but we are pretty sure that the features extracted in that part are not that high level features. They are quite reliable but simple features, and then use the mechanistic model after it to make the actual decision. Why use the deep network at all then? Because it's good at handling large amounts of data. So use that to get a quick low level features. They are really good at feature extractors, and then take the decisions based on them.
Great, thank you. Do you see any potential in automating X-ray report generation using visual language models? What about the evaluation of such multimodal models? The currently existing metrics or benchmarks for example, visual language models do not allow for consistent evaluation of accuracy / false positives detection. Do you see this as a promising area of research? So a few questions wrapped up there.
Yeah, but there is a common, thank you, Vicky. There is a common thread in the question, which is mainly from the evaluation perspective, which is quite important. I don't see that much of an option other than to evaluate with clinicians and doctors. in the loop, which brings me to a shameless plug of the Turing-Roche partnership is doing a lot of work in clinicians in the loop AI design. And not only just clinicians, but other stakeholders as well, because there is another project on patient-involved design. Anyways, so but coming back to the question, the main it is true that we don't have benchmarked like really widely accepted evaluation methods yet. So I would say the only way to do that is through clinician validation. But then again, how do you train it then? Which brings us to the continual learning aspect. That is, you get some validation from clinicians, do active learning, improve the model, go back to the clinicians, and it's an iterative process.
Perfect, thank you. I will just sneak in. We've got 2 more questions, so I'll try and sneak those in. So are there some examples of such AI tools being CE marked and currently being used in healthcare, or other tools you discussed still only in research only mode?
Most of these are in research only mode, unfortunately. There might be a few just coming through. None of my own are CE marked. That much I can say. So there is a roadblock to translation, which is sort of what I started off with. Yeah.
Okay, I would just sneak in the last question. So how to evaluate the quality of explainability? Can it be assessed qualitatively? Are there any relevant standards currently?
Relevant standards is a different question. So standards would mean sort of it's widely accepted. I'm not sure whether that is there yet. However, for very particular applications, there are ways of evaluation. Like conformal analysis, there are specific ways of doing that and evaluating that. For the feature alignment thing, there are ways of doing that. We also did that, which is sort of having attention maps and activation maps, and whether they align with the clinical areas pointed out in the annotations. So there are individual ways of doing that. Whether whether a standard is possible in widely in explainable AI, I'm not sure. Mostly it is application oriented, which is interesting in the sense of how regulations are coming in transparent AI as well. So I will just mention this, you can look it up. I won't go into the debate, but the EU AI Act, which we participated in through GPay, looks into the trustworthiness of the models. Whereas the approach in, say, China and Singapore is to look at the trustworthiness or transparency from the application point of view, not the AI models at all. There are positives and negatives in both approaches. But again, that raises the question whether a standard is possible or not.
Thank you so much, Rohan. We're just at time now, so I'll draw us to a close. Thank you all so much for joining. And thank you, Rohan, for such a fantastic talk.